Hello, screenwriters, and welcome to Writing for Screens, this week's live stream. Ask me almost anything. The question is, can you make a movie without a script? My name is Glenn Gers, and I am the Chief Operating Everything here at Writing for Screens, a channel which I created in order to take the skills, tools, and insights that I had to figure out for myself in a 25-year career writing for Hollywood, for movies and TV. I am now on my way out of that business, and I wanted to leave behind some of these lessons for you who are figuring out your own path. I cannot give you a system. I cannot give you an answer. There is no right or wrong way to be an artist or write a script. However, I can show you some of the things I've learned and tried so that you can see if they work for you. That is what every artist must do. Every artist must make their own path, depending on what you like, what you want to do, what your world will support. All these things that I can't know about you and only you can figure out for yourself. These are choices you have to make for yourself. All I can do is try and show you some stuff that I really studied. Here it is, the channel main page, and if you look down towards the bottom, this is where the good stuff is. These are 3 playlists. The first 3, as you scroll down on the main page, are Screenwriting Essentials, Screenwriting Tools, Skills, and Craft, and The Process, Being a Writer. These 3 playlists contain about 50 10-minute-ish videos, each on a topic. The topic is the title. The topic is also the thumbnail so that you can see it there in bright, big, colorful words. Character, dialogue, genre, flashbacks, whatever it is, I've tried to boil it down to some useful thoughts that you can figure out for yourself. I urge you, I beg you, I encourage you strongly to go check those out, because anything you want to learn from me is probably going to be in those lessons. Everything I'm saying here is a sort of a variation or a little flourish on that main stuff. It is there for you 24/7 for free. Check it out, please. But having done that, I also started doing live streams. Live streams, I do them now every Wednesday if I can make it at 1 p.m. Pacific time zone. And that's why I'm here, and that's what we're doing. Going to say a couple of hellos, and then we're going to move right into the stuff. Hello, Tom Lewis, and Nathan, and Skepular, and Steed. Hi. So here's the deal. Somebody had asked me a question. Actually, this came up originally because about 2-3 years ago, there was a movie called Blonde. It was a Netflix movie by a guy named Andrew Dominic. He's an Australian filmmaker who's made 2 or 3 very artistic, very complex, visually very interesting movies. One of them is this one. It's called Blonde. It was about Marilyn Monroe. It was based on a novel by Joyce Carol Oates. It was pretty roundly trashed. I cannot say I loved it, but I admired it. The thing about it that I thought was interesting was in this interview, I believe it was in Sight and Sound magazine from the UK, he was talking about how he works in images. He doesn't want to tell a story. He makes scenes, he does capture moments, but it's all about the images, the visual language. And that made me think about a movie that was not based in language, not based in verbal language, was in cinema language, in visual language. And I began to think, well, I mean, he still had a script. He was still working from a book. There were still scenes. Characters took place and took actions within scenes based on the novel. But basically, it wasn't about the script. That's for damn sure. And it made me think about this concept of essentially, can you make a movie without a script? And there's a lot of complexity, variations to this, but I want to focus in, because like obviously a documentary is a movie without a script, or could be. But can you make a narrative movie, a story, a movie or a show without having a script? The answer is absolutely yes. I know this is a screenwriting series, and yet the truth is filmmakers very often really aren't that interested in the scripts. Famously, the storyboarders, you might call them, Kubrick, Hitchcock, George Miller, wrote Mad Max Fury Road by storyboarding. There was he and the writer together storyboarded the movie, every single image. They did this whole room, all four walls were this giant storyboard in which they worked out the story and the imagery at the same time. So essentially they were writing without a script. They were absolutely creating a script which eventually was written based on the storyboards. But the concept here is that the script, the language, the words are simply part of the production, like set design or camera work or anything else. Now, the director is trying to tell a story, working in collaboration with a designer, a cinematographer, a writer. The writer is the guy doing the carpentry with the words and the characters and the story. But they are doing it eventually because of the logistics of filmmaking. They made it into a script, but they didn't create it in terms of a script. They weren't thinking, I'm going to write a script and then we're going to translate this script into a movie, which is how most productions are done. So that's one level of working without a script in a certain sense, in that you never have that first verbal version. Obviously, there are words in the production. There are dialogue in the movie, not a lot. But then let's talk about going all the way into the improvisational filmmaking. And there are many, many excellent filmmakers who do this. Silent films, when film started, when filmmaking began, it was common, partly because it was silent, although there is dialogue in silent films in the title cards. But silent films very often just worked from a scenario, which was basically a list of scenes or actions. It was a sort of an outline. And then the director and the crew and the actors would go out and they would have, some of them would write a full script. A lot of them would just say, okay, now we're going to do the scene where he gets on the horse and rides away. And they just do it. They didn't bother to write a script of that. They just said, this is the part where he leaves town. Okay, we'll get a couple of shots of him leaving town. We'll put it together. We'll figure it out. During the majority of professional film history, that people have worked from using a script first and then filming the script. However, in the 1950s, John Cassavetes notoriously said, what if we didn't do that? What if we improvised a movie? He was an improvisational actor. He worked with theater people in New York. He had access, or he managed to get access to some cheap cameras and sound equipment, and they made the movie entirely improvised. It was called Shadows, was his first movie, but he continued his entire career making films in an improvisational sense. There would often be an idea for a story or an idea for situations, which they would then play out with the cameras rolling. The Safdie brothers, more recently, especially their early films, Heaven Knows What, Good Time, are heavily improvised. Much of the dialogue is made up on the spot, although some of it isn't. The Duplass brothers, equally. But also found footage horror movies, Blair Witch Project. There wasn't a script for that. There was a scriptment, as they called it. There was a treatment, there was an idea of what was going to happen, but they improvised that movie. Then there's a sort of variation on that, where there is a story, but not a script, or not a full script. In other words, Judd Apatow, among many comic filmmakers, will often create sequences in which it is expected that there will be improv. And sometimes they just make a scene which is based on the idea, we will have these two guys in this situation and we'll improv from there. And we'll shoot it a lot of times, and then we'll figure it out in the editing room. Many other filmmakers will use improv in the creating of the story, but then eventually lock it in and make a script out of that. Mike Leigh, British filmmaker, has a lengthy progress in which he takes a concept for a film, he brings the actors together, and they improvise the movie together. Terrence Malick, notoriously, I haven't read the new book, which really gets into the details of his work, but he does certainly do a lot of improvising. It seems, when you look at his films, that a fair amount of them, they've been improvised on the set and then written basically in post. In other words, afterwards, they will write narration or improvise narration, voiceover, to bridge and tell the story. It started with Days of Heaven, I believe. Um, and this is completely poetic and non-scripted filmmaking, and yet there is a story. They are working from a concept, very often with very specific details. So this is just scratching the surface of what you can do in terms of the art of filmmaking does not require a script in that sense. A lot of the reasons that people work from scripts are frankly financially and business based. In other words, the equipment was up until very recently extraordinarily expensive, difficult to use, difficult to handle. It required gigantic crews. The cameras were the size of a small car. And also, in order to make it a profitable show business, they wanted to have some control, which meant you couldn't just let people go off and make a movie and see how it came out. You would say, show me the script, show me the plan, I will approve the budget based on that. Likewise, and this is really important for anyone interested in indie filmmaking, without a script, you can't stay to a budget. In other words, the point of scripting is that you can plan and organize your production in order to make sure that you're not wasting. Like if you suddenly have to stop and figure out a scene and you've got a crew, it might only be 6 people or it might be 300 people. Those people sit idly getting paid daily. They get meals, they get insurance, there's trucks, there's parking, there's location rentals. There's a lot of cost to not knowing what you're trying to get done on that day. But at the artistic side of it, there are also a lot of art forms where there's a structured form, but there's also a looser form. For instance, in music, there's jazz, which is extremely improvisational. Many forms of popular music are very improvisational. They're not just people sit down and just do whatever the hell they want. Sometimes it is. But when you compare that to something like a symphony orchestra, part of the reason is you have, I don't know how many people are in a symphony orchestra, but you got to tell them what they're playing. Otherwise, it's not going to work. There has to be a plan. There has to be an organization. Those are different forms of the art of music. So what I'm going to talk about here, because I try to always make these little meditations practical, talk about how do you make a script without a story. Make a movie without a script, because that's it. What the important thing here is, just because you're working with no script doesn't mean you have no story, doesn't mean you have no plan. Just like when you start improvising in a jazz piece, they don't ordinarily, they choose a plan. They say, we're going to work off of this piece of music or this theme, and we're going to then pass the improvs around and we're going to work towards a shape. But there isn't story. There is an idea. Likewise, when Cassavetes or anybody else started their movies, they didn't just say, we're just going to make a movie and just go from complete blank slate and then work as we go. There was a point. There was the story of a relationship, the story of a friendship, the story of a Broadway show, whatever it is. There was an idea there, and there were some arcs and characters that were sort of already built in when they began the story. The point of it is that they didn't write every scene and line of dialogue. They said, let's riff out a bunch of possible things that could happen, or a rough story arc, and then we will work within that and discover and explore and play within each other, create with the cameras rolling. In order to do that, so essentially you're still writing a movie. You're doing a different process of writing, a collaborative process of writing, and one in which the crew and the actors and the production are part of the writing process, if you want to think about it that way. No matter how it goes, you're probably not going to be able to create a coherent narrative without some form of writing, without some form of storytelling. Obviously, you could do a non-narrative film in which you just sort of captured random stuff. But the key to this is you have to think in terms of, if you are going to do that, you are going to probably need to structure your production around the realities of what that takes. In other words, you don't want to have the same kind of production scale that you would have for a Marvel movie. You don't want 300 people standing around the set when you're improvising. You would rather have the smallest, simplest production, the one that can move the most flexibly, and the one that costs the least, because that way you can afford to do this. But even if you had unlimited money, the discomfort and the pressure, the reason that you have all those people is in order to perform certain kinds of technical events, which an improvisational movie wouldn't necessarily have. In other words, nobody would say, now, this other character is going to come running in. If you didn't plan that, that other person isn't there. If there's going to be a lightning strike that blows the windows out, you have to plan for that. That's a special effect. So instead, the improvisation tends to work towards the things that can happen between people. But you need to plan your production in order to allow for the time and the looseness of that. In other words, when you have a script, you can say, I've got these 10 lines in this scene. I need to get this scene. I'm going to shoot it 3 or 4 ways, and then we're going to move on. If you don't exactly know how the scene's going to go, you need to shoot it over and over and over as you figure it out, and then you capture bits, and sometimes you have to do things to put them together. Sometimes you have to redo them, because when you're writing a script, you have drafts. You don't know what you're doing when you're essentially improvising when you write a script, but nobody's watching, and you simply work out, you say, okay, I'm going to improv this, and then I'm going to rewrite it and fix it. In improvisational filmmaking, you have to do that with everybody else, which means you have to allow for the process of essentially drafts. You have to do the scene over and over. You have to have some form of method in which you make decisions. And that if you are finding the story as you go, you have to leave extra time and space for that. You also need to be able to figure out a production in which you can go places and do things. A film production needs a physical place. It needs a space. It needs people. It needs resources, which means the reason a lot of improv movies are in some controlled space. Like they'll say, okay, we're gonna take over a department store for a week and we'll improv the movie, but we're all working within that and we can move around within that. Or with Cassavetes, he very often just filmed at home. He would just film things that could take place in his home. He would say, okay, I'm going to do a scene in a diner because I know a diner and I will arrange to go there for a day and improv there. So there is already some planning. There may not be scripting, but there has to be planning. There have to be decisions made. The other thing you want to do is you have to learn about production. You have to understand. In other words, this is not a writer's issue. There may be a writer on the set. There may be a writer involved in the improv process to work with the crew if they so desire that kind of creation. Or very often one of the actors or one of the producers or the director is essentially the writer. They're the one making the choices and the decisions. Okay, the interesting thing about this is, and by the way, here's a list of some of the improvisational filmmakers I just mentioned. But here are some of the pitfalls that improv endangers you. Which is, first of all, you can paint yourself into a corner. In other words, if you decide, I'm going to do a story in which, like with Shadows, there's a couple, a brother and sister who are passing racially in terms of their society. They're black, but they are able to pass, or one of them is able to pass, and it's about that issue. So having this story, having these characters, having this story, you might improv a scene in which somebody says, okay, I'm leaving, I'm going to Florida. And then you've got the problem that person is gone from the movie unless you want to go film in Florida. So you have to watch out for doing something that paints you into a corner, or in the middle of an improv, somebody just says, like, I've poisoned you. The character is going to die. There are things where you want to be careful because you create a narrative situation that you actually can't get out of. And then you have to rewrite it. You have to reshoot it. The other big narrative pitfall is simply incoherence. As we all know, as writers, it's very difficult to make sense, to tell a story that makes sense and works. So incoherence, to being able to tell a story that flows, it's a talent. Not everyone can do that. Certainly not everyone can improvise that. It's worth experimenting with if you want to try it, and to study the way that those kind of films work. But the other possible narrative pitfall is most satisfying narratives have some form of what I call setup and payoff. In other words, something will begin in the story and then reappear later, and be sometimes used in a new way, or in some way have something be revealed, or have some steps taken because of an earlier step. All of those things become very hard to do if you are just improvising scene to scene. Like if all of a sudden somebody says like, I'm truly your sister, it may be that earlier on in the story they were kissing, and you have to be careful about that kind of, in order to make the payoff work, in order to make the revelation or the plot's change work, you need to set things up often. And improv makes that very difficult. So what I would suggest is that you have to create a process. Unscripted filmmaking, the other name for this, requires a spiral process like I talk about with writing, in which you come around to things many times. You come back, you think about it, you explore, you do drafts, you rework them. But you have to do that in the production instead of the writing. This is very often expensive and difficult. You have to be skilled at production to be able to pull that off. Not impossible, really cool, but you need to know what you're doing about that. You need to be able to think of a process in which you can shoot, often edit, and then go back and shoot some more, which means the location, the costumes, everything need to be something you can go back to. Now, many filmmakers leave that in their planning. In other words, they plan assuming there will be reshoots. Even big Hollywood films very often will include in the budget time and money for reshoots, because when you put things together, even scripted films, you often discover you need things and then you want to go rework it. With an unscripted film, you're essentially doing a rough draft of it, and then you sort of patch it together and you look at it, and then you move on and do more. Digital technology obviously makes this much more possible, fun. You can easily collect large amounts of material. You could shoot, like old film, you had a 10 to 20 minute roll of film, and then when that was done, you had to stop and reload the camera. But now you can run an hour or two just improving. Things are lighter, they're more flexible. You can store and work with much more material. Editing becomes harder. Remember, first of all, editing becomes much more difficult in terms of matching. You have to watch out for if you do two different versions of the scene and the people are standing in different places, you can't cut part of one and part of the other. However, there is much, much more possibility and flexibility with this. Sean Baker, by the way, the brilliant filmmaker of Anora and Florida Project and Red Rocket, he recently, Academy Award winning, very much works with improvisation. He doesn't work without a story, he doesn't work without characters, but he works very much with improvisation. The thing about this is that you can't necessarily then expect the financial rewards of a conventional story. The method by which this kind of thing operates is less familiar to the audience. The audience is trained on an unimprovised, heavily crafted, artificial way of telling stories. And improvisational, unscripted, creative filmmaking very often means that you can capture reality, and you can find moments that have an authenticity and a power completely unavailable to anything else. And the collaboration can bring all sorts of incredible gifts. You just can't expect that to sell like a Marvel movie or Top Gun, because it's very, very, very unlikely. Even Anora, which just won every award in the world, it's still not going to be a box office hit with like the other big movies of the year. So just at the end, I think that I wanted to mention one thing for you to sort of get your teeth into, a sort of thought experiment, which is is there such a thing as a popular, accessible, commercially viable narrative without a script? The answer is absolutely. There's a lot of it. It's called reality TV. Although there are people who are supposedly the characters, they are very much playing characters. They are very much playing to the narrative of the reality show. They are very much developing events with the intent to tell a fun story or to make these dramatic gestures. So what really the question there is, when you start to think, oh, we've got John Cassavetes and the Real Housewives, how does that cross over? The answer is it does. The question is the values. In other words, it is entirely possible to take a reality show approach to an art film story or characters or vision. It's just people don't do it because they don't think they'll make as much money. However, those of you who are interested should consider learning from the reality shows to see what you could do, not to make a reality show, but to take the unscripted vision and put some art into it, because I think that's an opportunity. It's just something to think about. Okay, going to go back to the questions and comments. Hello, Akari. Greetings, Lake Filter. Hi, Fung. Just came out fresh from the cinema watching a reissue of Michael Haneke's Cachet. First time watch, totally shocked to my very core, very haunting. I have never seen a Haneke film, and I have heard he is brilliant and devastating, and I look forward to it. Thank you for the recommendation. How cool is that? Thank you. Alec Webb. Hey, going through my yearly. This is the year. Start my screenplay phase. Okay. Do it, Alec Webb. Do it. Start. If you are looking for help starting and there's some pitfalls that you tend to fall into, I gotta say, I do urge you to look at my videos, because they are exactly what the point of my videos, the short ones, not these live streams, the short videos, the first 3 playlists is, I believe almost every problem or question that you are going to run into when you're trying, this is the year I start my screenplay, I think you're going to find the answer there. Watch them. They're short. They're only 10 minutes. There's 50 of them, but you can watch them over time. But a lot of them deal with, how do I organize my process? How do I get myself to do this work? That's a lot of what it is. The process being a writer, that section, that's all about that. So please take a look at that. And don't worry about how I spell my name. Hello, Akio and Mark Burton. I'm so sorry. 7-day week since March 13th, when your dad passed away. I'm so sorry. My writing has suffered. Okay, this is an important point. Sometimes you should let it suffer. Maybe your life is more important at the time. It's not, unless you are actually like, if I don't write this week, I can't pay the rent. Don't worry about it. Sometimes other things come up. It's okay. If you never get back to it and you feel like you want to, that's another issue. But you've had an enormous trauma, an enormous loss, a lot of change in your life, and you've been working very hard. Take it easy. Take a break. It's okay. So I'm just going to say, I am very sorry that that you're having a hard time. But I would say one of the things to help with your hard time is ease up on yourself. Be good to yourself. Take care of yourself. That is a part of being an artist, is learning how to take care of yourself. Akari, about the improvisational unscripted, sounds like wild fun, especially scenario as a scene area. Exactly. An extravaganza of scenes, a spectacular event. And the idea that in character, the actors play or improv to co-create a scene. Yes. If you like, the thing about all of this is that it's not writing only, it's filmmaking. And the truth is, and this is the big lesson, is sort of embrace your insignificance. Writers are not in control of films or movies or shows. They are a collaborator in a production which is run by other types of artists with an entirely other art form involved. And that's okay. That's one of the hardest things to get used to as a screenwriter, is we're just a part of the project. We are not in control. Even though it seems like we're locking everything in and getting it to work, the truth is we're not. We're just a part of the game. I kind of, as a writer and filmmaker, I had a hard time with that for most of my career, until I finally accepted, when I got a chance to direct a little, I was like, oh, this is an entirely different thing. And the writer doesn't do this. So anyway, did the latest Snow White film have a plan? I guarantee you they had a plan. I guarantee you large committees of people went over that plan word by word. The fact that you have a plan does not mean everything will be great. Everything, fair joke though. I Hate Jackie Chan says most of Wong Kar-Wai films are shot without scripts, including Chungking Express, which I have seen and like a great deal, and In the Mood for Love also. Reportedly, his movie Happy Together has 11 hours of footage. Yes, that is a very good point. About, first of all, yes, thank you for reminding me. Wong Kar-Wai does indeed, once again, I don't believe they improv with nothing. In other words, they have a story or a shape or an idea of the people and the place and the world and the theme. But they work out how that's going to be told, because in order to make a film, you need to decide, I'm going to gather all these people up and take them to this particular type of location to get this particular scene. You can't do that improvisationally. I mean, you can just get everyone together in a van, get a crew of 3 or 4 people, 2 or 3 actors. You drive around and you say, okay, we're going to go to this river and we're going to shoot a scene at the river. And now we're going to go to this diner and we're going to say to them, hey, is it okay if we shoot here? The odds are they'll say no unless you can pay. But the point is, yes, you can improvise to that extent. It requires a very, very skilled writer, filmmaker to put a story into that. But it's completely doable. But I believe that somebody like Wong Kar-Wai has a rough idea of the story. In other words, in order to do, In the Mood for Love, you need to know about this apartment and these people who live there. You can't accidentally do that. There's a complex story. I think that they outline or sketch out the plan, but then they improvise how they're going to tell the story and what's actually going to happen moment to moment. Bijan Bain, hello to Thailand. Wasn't there a 1990s indie set in or near a bodega that was fully improv? It features you may be talking about Blue in the Face. Blue in the Face is a movie I'm delighted by. It was, what happened was there's a really cool indie filmmaker named Wayne Wang, who was working with a really cool novelist named Paul Auster. They did a movie called Smoke, which was an indie film set around a cigar store in Brooklyn, which was scripted. However, they had a few days, like they shot faster than they thought they would. They had a few days left over and they said, we've got all this talent, we've got this crew, let's just improvise a movie. The movie was called Blue in the Face. It's a blast. It's just whacked out. It's not really narrative, but it's fun. So anyway, yes, there absolutely was. It's called Blue in the Face, Wayne Wang, Paul Auster, leftover film and leftover cast and crew from the movie Smoke, which I also recommend. It's a very cool little indie. Have you ever watched Taiwanese classic film Yi Yi? It feels like nothing happening and no script at all, but at the same time, it feels like a film about everything. I have not, but I will put it on my list. That sounds fascinating. I don't know how it was produced. Sometimes you script something to feel unscripted, and that's another whole brilliant talent that it's required. The main reason I'm trying to get into this is to say the sort of blindered commercial filmmaking system insists that films must be made in a certain way. And I'm just pointing out they don't have to be. There is a price to be paid and there is a cost to doing it. But yeah, absolutely. There's absolutely no reason to stick to that plan as if it is required by the art form. It's not. You can make a film without a script. And that was sort of my point, even though I am a screenwriter and love it. I think Easy Rider was improvised as they trialed. Yes, absolutely. Good point. Thank you. That is definitely one. And you definitely can tell there are certain scenes where it's like, these people are lost. They're just bullshitting, which is great, honestly, but it can be real. The thing about all this is that people are trained to narrative cues, and therefore the audience can very often feel lost and bored when those familiar structures are not presented. That's okay. I mean, you just have to recognize that you're not going to get a big audience for an improvised film most of the time, or at least not big compared to the entertainment industry machinery. Good afternoon, fan club. No problem. It is quite okay. Enjoy. The last session is available. Every one of these live streams is always available on the site. You can see them there. They're there. Okay. If you cast enough players with stand-up or improv experience, you could go largely unscripted with a theme. Red Fox, Will Smith, Martin Lawrence made up tons of their sitcom lines. Absolutely. Like I said, Judd Apatow and many other really fine comedy filmmakers, they leave room. They say, yeah, we're going to get these people, and then we're going to say, like, try a different way, and play with it and do stuff. But they've created the story, the situations and the characters and the progress. Like in this scene, you have to decide that you're going to break up with your girlfriend or whatever it is. There's a point to each scene, and that's generally pre-planned to allow for improv. There's no rule. There's no rule. Did you write a script for the live stream? Yes, I did. The script is very loose here. Hold on. Let's just do a screen share, and you can see this is the script of it. And I have it right up on my screen so that I can just sort of scroll through it, and there we go. And so the things I just talked about, you see them there. The thing I'm trying to do, which is really messing me up, because I've been doing these live streams for about 5 years. It is now a routine that I can do. I've been busy this week. I planned this starting last night. I had a scrap pile. If you don't remember, I did a video called Brainstorming and Scrap Piles. In that, I advise having when you get an idea for something, put it in a coherent, organized place. So I have ideas for these live streams and scripts, and I have a little file for them. So yesterday afternoon, I opened that up, and I looked through, and I thought, oh, Filmmaking Without a Script. And I opened it, and there was this interview with Andrew Dominic and a couple of notes. And then I jotted down some quick ones about Cassavetes, or jotted down a few of these notes. Then this morning, I sat and I wrote, okay, this is the thing I want to say, which is you can do it. You'd have to essentially write with your production. All the things I said, I wrote down as a series of essentially index cards in this document on Scrivener. The thing is, I am trying to figure out how to do Substack. I would like to be able to turn these live stream topics into little essays that I put on Substack as a reading version. That is so much more work. Here, I can show you. Why not? So down at the bottom, I've got, this is the end of the script, and then I wrote Substack version, and I started to write it. I tried to write down essentially all the things I've got with some variations. And I got this took about half an hour or so, but then I have all these other notes, the rest of the story that I haven't gotten to. And it was just too much work to do. Like I can do these improv-y live streams. So I need to change my process. In other words, I could have easily written that essay if I had given myself a week or two to take a half hour here and there, do a rough draft of each of the topics as a paragraph instead of a note, and then come back to spiral around and do a little rewrite and then a polish, and then pretty soon it would be ready to go. But I haven't yet learned that process for Substack essays. And I don't want to overwhelm myself with work, but I do want to try and create this new means of expression. because these live streams, which I find delightful to do, and they're frankly easier because I don't have to overthink the words. Most people don't want to watch an hour of this. They'd like to read a paragraph or two and be done. So that's what I'm working on. Okay. Robert Freeman says, or if you are as rich as Francis Ford Coppola, you can get hundreds of people and keep changing the Megalopolis story with everyone moaning at you. Yes, exactly. And I kind of admire it. It's a mess. It definitely, this is the problem, is that if Megalopolis had been made for a couple 100,000, it would have been cool. When it costs that much, you have to make 200 million to make it back. Most people aren't going to want to watch that. But I rather enjoyed Megalopolis. I thought, wow, this is the most expensive improv movie I've seen, but cool. Okay, Lake Filter says, soap operas in my country is quite famous for being made without a proper script. They work based on an idea or a rough outline and improvise most of it on the set. I think that's cool. I think that's great. I wish I could do that. I would love to do that. Anyway, that's great. Or if you had cast Tony Roberts and Albert Brooks, especially in a short, you could adapt an unscripted play. Well, if you've got a play, it's scripted, but I know what you're saying. You need people who are talented at this form of performance writing, creating, improvising, collaborating. It's an art form. Okay. No more comments because we're gonna run through the hour. Hello, A Link. Watson Neal says, don't you think improv makes it more real? Yes, absolutely. There is a magical authenticity that comes across when you aren't overly scripted. There are people who can make a scripted line. There are actors and directors who can work together to create a sense of improvisation within a tightly scripted work. Sidney Lumet, very famous for this. Sidney Lumet and Al Pacino in Dog Day Afternoon, and everyone in Dog Day Afternoon. That's a scripted movie, but it feels like they're just talking. Anyway, yes, I believe the whole value of this is that you capture things that overly structured and performed work doesn't feel. That has its own delight. These are both, and the coolest thing is when you can kind of blend them. To me, that's the coolest thing. Michael says, we had to create a story using discarded footage of film. That is a cool assignment. Absolutely. That is great. And honestly, it is a way to make a movie. You can just take some actors and have them just improv the hell out of stuff and then take it back and edit it together. It's a doable thing. I enjoyed Roberta says, I enjoyed Sean Baker's films. Tangerine was way better than Anora, though. I haven't seen Tangerine. I've heard it's terrific. I loved Anora. I love his work all over. The Safdies, Sean Baker, these are terrific filmmakers who are bringing an excitement to their way of working. Akari says, isn't it also wild, given how important and real it is, that people live either completely improv or way too scripted? You mean in life? You want to be sovereign in how you choose to live your life as much as scripting. Yes, yeah, actually, if you want to think about that, the truth is we can't script our lives. We can try. We can have little sound bites ready to go, or we can make plans for how we think a conversation will go, but there's other players involved with their own scripts. And so that is true. It is wild that we should learn to be better at improv in our life, truthfully. That's my message. Learn how to improv your life. Learn how to listen. Learn how to respond to what they're saying or what the situation is, instead of just trying to impose your script. That's a good point, Akari. Thank you. Stay Foolish says, I disagree with you. Mr. Beast's reality show is being exposed as scripted. I believe all reality shows are scripted to have a dramatic climax. It's not really reality. Yes, no, we're not disagreeing. I am agreeing. That's what I'm saying, is that reality shows are, in fact, improvised narratives. There's a lot of improvisation going on, but there is a plan and there is an intention, and they are playing characters who are often different than themselves. So yes, that's what I'm saying, is that to me, it's a shame that the reality TV is putting all this power and excitement into such crappy thoughts, such crappy presentations, such crappy insights, when you could take that same effort, that same reality feeling, and do really interesting stories. How cool would it be to do stories about real estate brokers or people who are running a restaurant, and really get into some good stuff? That's my frustration. I do not believe that reality TV is, quote, documentary. Never. Okay. Some actors are known for being able to improvise a lot. Robert Downey Jr., for example, is notorious for it. He's lost work from it, but he's also done some pretty incredible films in this way. Yes, that's true, although, once again, he improvises within the structure. Ryan Gosling also absolutely loves to improvise. Was extremely frustrated with me and it wasn't me, the production wouldn't allow him to rethink and reshape the scenes as much as he would have wanted in Fracture. And I felt bad about that. It was my first movie job after 20 years of trying to break in. I couldn't take his side against the producers, but I will say, yeah, no, there should be more room for improv, honestly, in productions. Fung says, since I start a routine of watching a film every day, suddenly all my writing blocks have vanished and I'm full of ideas. That is great. All I will say is make sure that it's not just ideas. Try to create in that routine a little work session, just a little writing things down and making progress on them instead of just piling up inspirations. I only say this from my personal experience because I have done that. That brainstorming and scrap piles thing, I have scrap piles bigger than I will ever get to even look through. And that's too much. So do try to add in the full of ideas, also working on them, creating a form for them, creating some work to make them into works of art. That's a wonderful thing, Fang. I'm so glad that you found a routine that helps you break through the fear, which is what writing blocks are, and the self-criticism, which is what writing blocks are. Steed says to Mark Burton, sorry for your loss. Maybe you need a break. Maybe you should write a story, or write a story about what you're dealing with. Yes, absolutely. Steed also says, for anyone who likes comedy, please watch Whose Line Is It Anyway? An improv comedy show. British and US versions are great. Lots of fun, very clever comedians trying to put together scenes. Yes, that is cool. It also shows you the danger of improv when you're doing a longer narrative. Just getting a scene to work when you're improvising, that's a lot of work. And getting a scene to work where you actually have an intention is even harder. But getting a narrative to work, which is a collection of scenes in order, that's where you have to have a whole other layer of improv, because you've got scene improv and story improv. And you can't really, you can, but it is often good to have a sense of story and improv within it. Okay. My fan club says, I think improv also needs a very strong actors. Cousins and friends won't work. Yes, that is true. Improv is a skill. It is an art form. It is a talent. Not everyone can do it. Even truly great actors sometimes who are good at performance cannot improvise. There's also some really great improvisers who can't really act a scripted scene. Hello, Hasko. Welcome. Doesn't matter if you're late. Song Hye-kyo, Wong Kar-Wai lead actress in The Grandmaster, almost went crazy because Wong Kar-Wai never gave her a script and only gave her a memo 1 minute before take. What memo do you think that is? It's a memo like it depends. I know some directors will say try and get the sandwich away from the other guy or something. Give them a task, a motive. I don't know. Hasko says Dogville was apparently scripted to feel improv, and of course scripted reality shows. Indeed, yes. There are absolutely. Once I've said the landscape of working improvisationally is huge and getting huger and getting better. It's exciting and wonderful. Remember, the need to script and produce is partly a business need, and I'm not disregarding the importance of business, but I am trying to say, do remember that you can reform your art form and your business form in order to create other things than that one template. And that was my point. Have you watched In the Mood for Love 2001, the new director's cut of the film? No, I have not. It hasn't been released yet, but extra 19 minutes. Cool. No, I'm very interested, and that sounds cool. The director's cut premiere is already sold out here. That's neat. I didn't know about that. I'm looking for it. Kar-Wai has also announced a Chungking Express 2020 not long ago. Oh, neat. These are all very, very cool. Imogen is also trying to grasp Substack. So many platforms can be overwhelming. Tell me about it. But I think the important thing is, at least like with this, it's not like I knew how to do live streams when I started doing this, or even videos. What I've learned is that you have to do it in order to learn it. In fact, I just made that. Yes. Learn art by doing. And what I would say about that is, in order to learn Substack, the thing you do is do it. Try different things. You can always delete the ones you don't like anymore. But the idea of putting things out there, figuring out what your routine is, what your voice is, what your style is, what you're doing, you can't overplan that when you begin. It's much better to learn these new forms, these new media, by doing. Dog Day Afternoon felt like a documentary for me. I don't know if that's good or bad. It is good, and it was the intention of Sidney Lumet, the brilliant director. Okay, Sanchez Pablo says, you need to check out Edward Yang if you love Sean Baker. He is the Taiwanese version of Sean Baker. Neat. I have never heard of him. I am looking forward to that. Tokyo Story, Roberta says, feels like an improv. Indeed. Michael Tanaka says, did Janet Leigh receive less money for Psycho? Do you mean less money than she usually got, or less money than someone else? I suspect that she was the biggest name in that movie and got the most money. But whether or not she had a smaller payday than usual for Janet Leigh, a big movie star, that's entirely possible. They made the movie in black and white, which had many reasons, but it was a relatively low budget production for Hitchcock. And that's because it was so experimental. My fan club says, I met a guy from Love Island. He is really an arrogant prank like in the show. Well, cool. Yes, I worked with Ryan Gosling on a movie called Fracture. Fracture with Ryan Gosling and Anthony Hopkins. And so, yes, I did. I did indeed. Justin says, would you recommend to novice screenwriters to submit their screenplays into competitions such as Big Break or The Blacklist? Good question, Justin. Within reason, be careful. Not most of these contests do not give what they promise. You have to know, can you afford to enter a bunch of these contests? They cost money to enter. So you have to work within your ability to pay, because the odds of you getting anything back from it financially are almost non-existent. So assume that you are paying for that opportunity. The question is, what can you get? The Blacklist is indeed legit. The Blacklist is more of a community than a contest, honestly. There's a portal to attention. But the thing about all of these contests is that what can they give you? Can they give you an introduction to the business? Kind of. They very often don't. The ones that promise that you'll get to meet with executives from companies, very often those executives are very, very low level, and it's a formality, and it's not worth it, or it's overhyped. The Blacklist, The Nickel, Cinestory, those are all good. Those are authentic. They're real. But be careful. What I would say is the value of entering screenplay competitions, first of all, is if there is some form of feedback, that's okay. Feedback can be really crappy. I mean, remember, nobody knows anything, and a lot of the people who are giving feedback have their own agendas, or frankly, not maybe as talented as you. So feedback is iffy. The value of competitions is if you can get into the finals or the semifinals, or let alone win, you can use that on your resume. And that does help. It doesn't help a lot, honestly, but it's better than nothing. So the answer I would say is don't put too much effort into those competitions. If you can afford it and you don't mind, it's a lot like a lottery scratch off. It's like the odds are very, very slim that you'll get anything back, but what the hell? The ones that matter, and you should also do more research and find out which ones seem more real, because a lot of these things are just ways that they make money by getting people to pay the entry fee, and that's really all they care about. But I would say also film festivals have competitions within them. And those are more valuable in a way because if you do get a finalist or a recognition in them, even a small festival, that's a cool thing to credit. Like I was well regarded in this film festival competition. That means more than the commercial ones, the ones that are essentially, they're essentially scams, a lot of them. The other thing about film festival competitions is if you can go to the film festival that your work is in, even though nobody will read it, whatever, it's still cool. It gives you a little extra entree to be with other filmmakers, and that's cool. That's my basic idea. And Steed points out, read the terms and conditions. Many competitions are just AI farms now. Yes. Be very careful about competitions. If it is not attached to a film festival or a foundation or some educational or arts group that is not a production business, do those. Do the ones that are part of a larger organization like the Nickel, which is part of the Academy, I believe. Cinestory has a foundation in which they don't sell shit. They're just trying to teach. So that's my main point, is just be very careful. These businesses that say, enter this contest and you can win, but we take your money and your material, and the odds are bad and the rewards are vague, stay away. Not worth it. My opinion. Okay. Thank you, damn you all. I'm not sure which point was fair, but I'm going to just take it. The thing I don't understand was why Disney can constantly produce disaster recently when they are not improv. Sometimes they have disasters, sometimes they don't. Thunderbolts was a blast and a success. The answer is businesses, like any art, is a gamble. And the thing about that is that some people love the new Snow White. But the important thing to remember is that these things are being created according to a set of rules, according to a business plan. That tends to not make for the best art. On the other hand, art does not always make for the best business. So that's why Disney does what it does. And that's okay. All right. And A-Link says, don't forget to hit the like button. If you forgot, I forgive you. Okay. Are you sad that Social Network 2 is directed by Aaron Sorkin, not David Fincher? I'm only moderately sad because Sorkin is a competent director. He's not as good as Fincher, but he's pretty good. I mean, the movies he's directed so far, pretty good. I like it. And he's a good writer. So I'm okay with that. I'm curious what Fincher will do next, but I don't. Sorkin isn't a bad director. I believe he did Trial of Chicago 7, and that was excellent. Molly's Game didn't thrill me, but that was not the directing; it was the story, or the message of empowerment. I thought was forced. Anyway, there we go. Justin says, thank you. It means a lot. I've been working on a bunch of stories, but this one is near and dear to me. I started when I was 12, so I do want to do what I can do to put it out there. First of all, copyright it, register it, make sure that you own it. Second of all, do be careful. I would say be very wary and only submit to something that is either associated with a festival or an educational or artistic institution that is not just a screenwriting business. That's my tip. That is the end of my rant. That is the end of my live stream. Next week, who knows what will happen. Until then, go write something.